Hello, I'm Don Daler. Our first report from 1999 is an incredible story of courage and survival with a very unlikely heroine. Crystal Searles was just 10 years old when she was viciously attacked by a serial killer and left for dead. But Crystal refused to die. Instead, against all odds, she helped the police track down her attacker, a man who had murdered many times before.
I want him to die big time, because he's killed a lot of people. He deserves it.
Chilling words for a child, but when I heard Crystal Searles' story, I understood how easily she could say them.
Come here, Holly.
She's got scars of mind and body, scars that remind her every day of an ordeal almost beyond comprehension.
Probably the most gruesome crime I've ever dealt with in my 36 years in the business.
It began in the dark morning hours of December 31st, the eve of a new millennium. Crystal and her sister, who live in Kansas, were spending the holiday with the Harris family in Del Rio, Texas. Crystal shared a bedroom with her friend, 13-year-old Katie Harris. But as Katie slept on the bottom bunk bed and Crystal on the top, a man was lurking outside. At about 4 a.m., he broke into the house, entered the bedroom, turned on the light, and viciously attacked Katie.
I woke up because I heard a scream, and I sort of jumped up and I saw him behind her with his hand over her mouth and a knife by her neck.
And when you jumped up like that, did he see you?
Yeah.
Crystal didn't know that the man coldly glaring at her had murdered and raped for almost 2 decades and had gotten away with it until now. You got a good look at his face?
Mm-hmm.
What did he look like?
He was scary. He had a lot of hair, and he had hair all over his face. And
then what happened?
Then he slit her throat and came to me and slit mine too. And I put my hands up against the knife, and it cut me in all, my neck and my hands. After he slit my throat, I just laid there, and then he left.
Crystal's friend, Katie, lay dying on the floor. The knife had barely missed Crystal's jugular vein, but it severed her windpipe and larynx, and she was unable to scream or call for help. Terrified and bleeding, Crystal stumbled outside into the pitch-black night. She told me she didn't think she had time to check her sister and Katie's family in the other bedrooms. She thought they might be dead, and her instincts told her to run. Did you worry this person would come back for you?
Yeah.
So how did you look around for him, or you just hoped for the best?
I just went as fast as I could.
Went as fast as she could down a road she didn't know. She headed to the nearest house, a 1/4 mile away. How she found it is still a mystery. There was only a sliver of moon that night and no lights on in the house. But somehow Crystal, now perilously close to death, made it to the front door and rang the bell.
I said, "Who is it?" And of course she couldn't talk. So I flipped on the porch light and looked out the little peephole, and I saw a little girl standing there. That's all I saw, was it's a little girl.
Herbert Betts told me that nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see.
When I opened the door, she was covered in blood, and with her right hand she was pointing to her throat, and her little eyes just said, "Help me, help me." And I told my wife, I said, "Take care of this little girl," and I went to the phone to call 911.
In the dark, Herb's wife Marlene saw only the silhouette of a girl.
When I flipped on the overhead kitchen light, I mean, she was just covered in blood. And, all I could do was just stand there and say, my God, my God. That's just all I could do.
I have a little girl just rang my doorbell. She's covered in blood, and she can't talk to me. There's a big hole in her neck.
As Herb called 911, Crystal motioned for paper and pencil.
The very first thing she wrote on the note was, "The Harrises are hurt." She was more concerned about that family, and I guess her little sister was in there too, than she was about herself.
Crystal appeared to be going into shock as paramedics arrived. She was rushed to the hospital. Down the road, as dawn broke, police entered the Harris house and found the body of Crystal's friend, Katie. But Crystal's sister and the rest of Katie's family were still asleep and unharmed. 650 miles away in Kansas, Crystal's mother was also asleep.
I got a phone call Friday, December 31st at 6:05 in the morning.
It's the kind of call every mother dreads. Her daughter, critically wounded, was being airlifted to a trauma center. Pam Searles got on a plane and at 6 p.m. finally saw Crystal.
It was terrible. It was just awful seeing my baby lay there. And her face was really swollen, and she had a tracheotomy in her throat, and she was hooked up to all these machines and heart monitors and stuff. It was a really awful sight.
Crystal's life was no longer in danger, but she still couldn't talk. And with a killer on the loose, police had to move fast. By pointing her fingers and nodding her head, Crystal helped a police artist make a sketch of her attacker. Within 24 hours, Crystal picked this man out of a photo lineup. On January 2nd, just 2 days after the attack, police arrested him. His name, Tommy Lynn Sells. Sells wasn't even out of the patrol car before he'd confessed to murdering Katie and slashing Crystal's throat. But then Sells confessed to another murder in another state. And within days, he'd confessed to nearly 20 killings all across the country. Behind these walls, Sells told authorities a grisly tale of a murder spree that's lasted nearly 20 years. Val Verde County Police teamed up with Texas Rangers. Between them, they interviewed Sells for days, and they say a horrible litany of confessions spewed forth.
In Tommy's own words, he's told us that there's lots of more victims that he has murdered. Over 20 and under 50 is what he's told us up to this point.
Police are now directing their investigation to this.
Authorities now believe Sells is the man responsible for the abduction and brutal murder of Mary Perez in San Antonio.
Police block off part of the park
and 1 month later, the rape and murder of 13-year-old Haley McCone of Lexington, Kentucky. But perhaps his most repugnant killing happened back in 1987 in Ina, Illinois.
The father shot 3 times.
Russell Dardeen shot and mutilated. His 3-year-old son, Peter, murdered. His pregnant wife, Ruby, gave birth during the attack. Both mother and baby were beaten to death.
Tommy Lynn Sells was convicted of the murder of Katie Harris and sentenced to death. He currently awaits execution in a Texas prison. Meanwhile, Sells' final victim, Crystal Searles, is trying to get on with her life. The scar on Crystal's neck is still healing, but she says it doesn't bother her. And her mother says that she wears it with pride because she knows she's done something important. Crystal has stayed in touch with Herbert and Marlene Betts, the couple who helped save her. And in the spring of 2000, Crystal and her mother flew back to Texas for an emotional reunion.
Hi, Pam.
I'm so excited.
And you're so dressed up.
Oh, I love you guys.
Crystal. Hello. I'm glad to see you. I needed to hold her again for closure. That meant a lot. And now I guess I feel as close to her as I do to my own grandchildren. It's like gaining a new family.
Herbert believes that Crystal is a hero.
If Crystal hadn't identified him and they hadn't caught him, there would have been other killings.
Still, Crystal's psychological scars may run deeper than her physical ones. She watched as her friend was murdered, and she knows a fear that most people will never experience. Months after the attack, she sleeps with her mother every night, all night, and it is unclear when or if her life will be the same again.
I said, "Do you remember when I told you were going to be all right?" And she said, "Yeah."
I'll forget a lot of it, but I mean, it'll be always there.
Up next, a suburban mother spends 5 days at the mercy of a violent rapist. When Justice Files returns. Our next report from 1999 concerns an almost unimaginable ordeal. Debbie Puglisi was held captive by a murderous rapist, cut off from the outside world with no one to help her and almost no chance of escape. But as you'll see, Debbie was determined to survive, and she was blessed with a remarkable combination of strength, courage, and cunning.
Every working day, Debbie Puglisi comforts people on the brink of death. Debbie's a hospice nurse. She manages pain and brings closure to grieving families.
And then I'll call the doctor and see if we can have...
So it's a cruel irony that Debbie's husband of 25 years died violently, with no one there for him, and that Debbie herself was thrust into an unimaginable 5-day ordeal of rape, kidnapping, and torture.
I did not see anything. I did not hear anything. I didn't know what was coming.
It was a peaceful moment in a routine day. Debbie was planting roses in her quiet suburban Newark, Delaware neighborhood. Her husband, Anthony, was in the house napping. What Debbie didn't know was that a crack cocaine addict was driving around the area with the sole purpose of finding a woman to kidnap and rape, and he had spotted Debbie. Her planting finished, Debbie went inside.
As soon as I entered the kitchen, I was hit with my assailant's fist, the left side of my head, and was knocked to the floor.
His name is Donald Flagg. He had entered an unlocked side door while Debbie was gardening. Debbie had not seen him hiding in the kitchen. He quickly tied her wrists and ankles.
I remember thinking to myself, he's going to kill me, at the point when he started tying me and dragging me to the basement.
He dragged you downstairs, and what did he do?
When I first got to the bottom of the steps, he threw me down. He immediately removed my clothing and raped me. And when he was finished, he pulled my pants back up and then dragged me back up the stairs.
Flagg threw her on the kitchen floor, bleeding, and he left the house. Debbie thought the ordeal was over, but it was just the beginning. In minutes, Donald Flagg was back.
He took me to the foyer of my home and retied me and held a knife to my throat. I knew that he was stronger than I was. I was tied. There was nothing I could do to make him stop.
Bound and gagged, wrapped in her own blanket, Flagg dragged Debbie to her front door, where in broad daylight, he had backed his car up right on the lawn. A neighbor noticed the car, thought it was strange, but went about his business. Flagg threw Debbie in the car and took off for what would be just a 15-minute drive. Her hands and feet were bound, her body stuffed into the dark confines of her assailant's hatchback. Debbie Puglisi couldn't see and was unaware that when the car pulled into this garage, that her torture would continue for 5 long days in her kidnapper's own home. Within minutes, Donald Flagg raped Debbie again and then sodomized her and left her hogtied, wrists to ankles.
How do you get through something like that?
I kept thinking about my husband and children the entire time, hoping that somehow there would be some type of lead that they could follow to try and find me.
But what Debbie didn't know is that she would never see her husband again. On the second day of her ordeal, with her hands and legs bleeding from the ropes that still bound her, Debbie's assailant turned on his TV.
And I heard the news come on.
Anthony Puglisi was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head.
And that was the first I learned of my husband being shot.
Debbie realized that the man now raping and torturing her, Donald Flagg, also murdered her husband. The day before, when Flagg had broken into the Puglisi home and was waiting for Debbie to come in from the garden, Debbie's husband confronted Flagg. Flagg shot Anthony Puglisi in the head. 100 miles away in New Jersey, Debbie's sister Jane also heard the news.
I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. My husband was in the shower. I started screaming and crying, and, I was in shock.
Jane called their father in Florida.
Something like this you see on television, you see in the papers and so forth, and you just Woo, it hit home. It's here.
The family headed to Delaware and set up camp at a motel. Debbie's brother Bob, a New Jersey police officer, talked with Delaware police.
The question always was, do you think Debbie's alive? Do you think we're going to find her?
We had a murder, and we didn't know where Debbie Puglisi was.
Detective Dominic Gregory led the investigation. There wasn't much to go on.
We knew her pocketbook was there, her car keys. However, we could not find Debbie Puglisi.
Was she a victim or was she a suspect? A search of the area came up with nothing. The only real clues were fresh tire marks on the front lawn. Police had no option but to consider Debbie Puglisi a suspect in the murder of her own husband. Debbie's family protested to the media.
So bizarre, it just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, they were like the Cleaver family. I mean, their kids meant everything to them their whole life. My sister was a nurse. She did nothing but care for people.
Back at her assailant's home, Debbie once again watched her family on TV.
Watching my father on television and seeing the pain and the sadness in my father's face was probably the worst.
What did you see your father do?
I just remember him standing there. It was so difficult knowing that my family was out there wondering where I was.
The horror of Debbie's captivity became almost routine. Flagg hardly said a word to her and kept her tied motionless for 12-hour stretches. She had nothing to eat and only occasional sips of water.
I had a washcloth stuffed in my mouth with duct tape several times around my head.
For extra measure, Flagg would blast his radio in case Debbie managed to scream. At night, so she wouldn't try to escape, he forced her to sleep next to him, his arm draped over her body.
And to actually lie next to your husband's killer is just, it's so painful, and it's something that I try to think that happened to my body. It didn't happen to my soul.
When he wasn't high on crack, Flagg acted like it was business as usual. He made phone calls to friends, watched TV, even mowed his lawn. But when he was high, he would become angry and violent, one time shooting bullets into the wall.
I remember asking him, "Are you going to kill me?" And he said no, but he kept saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Debbie knew if she were to survive, if she were ever to see her family again, she had to devise a plan.
When we return, Debbie Puglisi's bold move to break free.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting our nation's greatest heroes.
Show your support for our injured service members by calling the number on your screen or give online at honorwarriors.org right now.
Time was running out for Debbie Puglisi. 5 days after she'd been kidnapped by the rapist and murderer Donald Flagg, she was in desperate fear for her life. Flagg had already killed her husband, and she was terrified that sooner or later he'd turn on her too.
I knew he was capable of killing, and I knew that if I stayed there that he would do me in.
Debbie got 2 breaks. Flagg replaced the ropes around her wrists with handcuffs, which allowed her slightly more mobility. And then Flagg said he had to go to work.
I wasn't convinced when he shut the door that he was going to work, so I decided to wait 1 hour.
Debbie's hunch may have saved her life. Flagg returned to check on her. She waited 1 more hour and then struggled to loosen the rope that connected her wrists to her ankles. She shuffled across the bedroom and reached the door.
When you think about that, opening the door, he might be sitting there with a gun. And I had to make a choice. You either open the door and die, or you go for it and you survive.
She made it through the door and groped in the darkness, where she remembered seeing a telephone.
I felt the phone, and then I could feel myself just, okay, maybe this is it.
Her hands cuffed, her heart pounding, Debbie managed to dial 911.
on 438.
Hello?
Please.
What's going on there, ma'am?
Please help me. It's Debbie Puglisi.
Okay, what's wrong, ma'am?
This man kidnapped me, killed my husband.
Where are you?
Newcastle County Police Dispatcher Stephen Conrad handled the call. He knew of Debbie Puglisi, but was skeptical at first.
She was so calm and so level-headed. I would really, considering what she had been through, I really would have expected her to be screaming hysterically.
I've got handcuffs on my arms and my feet. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Just stay on the phone with me until the officer gets there.
Thanks to state-of-the-art technology, the call was instantly traced, and police were on their way. Conrad's job was to keep her on the line.
Okay, this guy you said kidnapped you, where is he now?
Please come.
Okay, they're on the way, but where is he now?
Please.
Hello?
Are you there?
Yes, where is the man now?
He's at work, I think. But he might come back.
So you're there alone now?
Yeah, but he might get here before you.
How long have you been here, do you know?
Since Monday night. He killed my husband.
Do you know who this guy is?
No, I don't know him. Help me, please. Please help me.
Okay, they're on the way, man. Just stay calm till the officer gets there.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. Oh, my God. I want my children.
Okay, just sit tight till the officer gets there.
I want my children.
Officer Brian Daly was first on the scene.
Well, I took the front door. Partner took the side.
Do you see a car or anything outside?
I saw a light, but I don't have my glasses, so I'm so blind. I'm scared to open the door.
Okay, we should have an officer pulling up outside now. So if you hear something, that'll be one of the officers.
You promise?
Yes, ma'am. We have an officer. Okay, man, just stay calm.
Help me.
Just stay calm. He knows you're there.
I was pretty calm until I heard them at the door, and I lost it.
So I walk up to the door, and before I can start knocking again, I hear this, what would be considered a very blood-curdling scream of help.
Police kicked in the door and rescued Debbie Puglisi. After 5 days of horror and with more than 40 wounds covering her badly bruised body, Debbie was safe. Her father got the call in his motel room and told the rest of the family.
I went out of the room, and all the rooms were in line there, you know. And I just said, they found Debbie. She's alive. And I'm going to see her.
What was that moment like in the ambulance?
You know, it's bittersweet because I'm on my way to survival, to living, and that's when it hit me that my husband was dead. That whole week, I knew intellectually that my husband was dead, but I didn't feel it until I was in the ambulance, and I was on my way to see my children, and I knew that they would never see him again.
After an emotional reunion, the family prepared for Anthony Puglisi's funeral.
Debbie, tell me about being at your husband's funeral. The good news is you were there. The bad news, you were there.
As a hospice nurse, the only way I bring closure to someone who has died is to be there and to feel that pain. And it was very painful to first see my husband when I first went into the funeral home and to look at him. But that's what made it real, was seeing his body and spending some time with him.
Debbie says the healing process will last her lifetime. She finds it therapeutic to tell her story, and she thinks it might give other women who have been raped the courage to tell theirs. Donald Flagg made a full confession, was convicted, and will never be a free man.
You can't move on from something this horrific without thinking, this was an evil person, a crack addict, who for a week got away with this, but he's in prison and I'm free and I'm going to be whole again.
In 2001, Donald Flagg was in a Delaware prison serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Coming up, one woman's battle to keep a rapist in prison when Justice Files returns. Our next report from 2000 examines the case of a woman who has spent more than 20 years fighting to keep the man who raped her in prison. Time and again, he has asked for parole, but she's determined that that will never happen.
It is a bedroom designed for serenity and security, a room where a middle-aged woman surrounds herself with the comforts of childhood. Festive pictures, furry animals, rainbows, and sunshine. But tucked inside this safe haven sits a cherished old doll, an unforgettable link to a violent past.
My name is Kimberly J. Croft. I was left for dead by Gary Reese. But I would not and did not die.
Kim is not just a victim, she's a survivor.
That's what she's been used for years.
Her favorite doll has soaked up 2 decades of tears since Kim was brutally attacked inside her suburban Cleveland apartment.
We aren't talking about, a crime of passion. We're talking about stabbing, strangling, suffocating, beating, and rape.
This was a vicious crime. After being raped, Kim was strangled with a pair of pantyhose and stabbed several times with a carving knife from her own kitchen.
Do you think he meant for you to die?
Yes. I don't think he would have tried so many ways if he didn't. He didn't want anybody to be able to identify him or to say he was ever there.
Police determined that her attacker was a neighbor who lived just down the hall, a 19-year-old high school dropout named Gary Reese. Although he claims innocence, Reese was convicted and sentenced to spend up to 75 years in prison.
Do you still remember the day that he was sentenced?
Oh, yes. Very clearly.
And do you remember how you reacted when you heard the judge?
I started crying all over the place. When they brought the verdict in, it was such a release. There was finality to it.
But not really, because now Kim's worst nightmare could come true. The Ohio Parole Board is planning to set him free. They decided that Reese, with good behavior, has paid his debt to society. After all these years, Reese still maintains his innocence, and he argues that even if he did commit the crime, he by now has earned his freedom.
I've strove during these last 20 years to improve myself physically, intellectually, and spiritually.
I don't believe he's even afraid of coming after me.
Kim is determined to keep Gary Reese behind bars, and she's mounted a high-profile campaign to make sure that happens.
Does a day go by where you don't deal with this?
Not when I'm in the middle. Not when I'm in the middle of the war.
She has fought this battle before. On 3 previous occasions, the state parole board decided to grant Reese an early discharge, and each time she persuaded the board to change its mind, flooding the state with letters and phone calls and front-page publicity. A one-woman crusader for victims' rights who has single-handedly convinced the state of Ohio to keep Reese behind bars far longer than most inmates convicted of violent crimes. For years, Kim fought her battles from the shadows, appearing on camera only in silhouette and keeping her last name out of the papers. But she gained more confidence each time his freedom was denied. Now, keeping him behind bars is her full-time job, her obsession, really, since she quit working and lives primarily off a small inheritance.
I have to make sure that I do everything within my power to make sure that he doesn't get out and hurt somebody else. Because he will.
To understand what motivates Kim, you must go back in time to October 12, 1979, a high-rise apartment in a Cleveland suburb, Friday afternoon. a knock at the door.
He said, "Remember me? I was here a couple weeks ago. I used your phone."
Kim felt safe letting him in. After all, he said he was locked out of his apartment. But this time was different. This time he hit her in the face with a metal object.
And he said, "All right, now I'm going to rape you."
And he did. Not once, but twice.
But all of a sudden he stopped. And he said, "Get up and put your clothes on."
Right then and there, something in the darkest part of that man's mind snapped. He was going to end Kimberly's life.
Police Captain Kevin Whalen was called to the scene 21 years ago as a young patrolman.
Kimberly Croft knew she was going to die. He was going to kill her. Not many people ever want to know when they're going to die.
Amazingly, Kim survived and managed to call for help. In the emergency room, detectives tape recorded her statement. They were afraid she wouldn't make it.
He says, "Are you enjoying this?" And I just looked at him. I didn't say anything.
Police were zeroing in on Reese. In his apartment, they found this unusual bottle opener, just like the weapon Kim had described. And she identified his picture for detectives.
Well, you saw this picture and you immediately knew.
Yes.
What did you say?
I said, "That's the one."
You'd gone through a very traumatic event. You would understandably be confused.
Right.
And yet you did not hesitate.
No.
That positive identification was key to Reese's conviction because there was no forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene. There was plenty of Kim's blood, but none of Reese's, and no semen or fingerprints. We talked to Reese here at the London Correctional Institution in Ohio, the first time he agreed to appear on camera.
21 years later, she's absolutely sure that you were the person who hurt her. Is she lying?
She's either lying or mistaken. I've never seen this woman until the day I met her in court. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on her.
Why should we believe you?
I would say the picture of who I was prior to this case is not somebody that would commit this crime.
But we found someone who knew him back in 1979. Someone who knew him very well.
One of the people we talked to was your ex-wife. And she said, "I hope he didn't do it. I don't think he did it. But was he capable? Absolutely."
That surprises me.
You know, our spouses know us better than anyone else. They see the best of us, they see the worst of us. Behind closed doors, they see it all. Why would she say something like that?
I haven't the foggiest idea.
But Gary, she says that you had been violent with her. She says that you often beat her.
No, that's not true either.
Is it possible that you've painted yourself into a corner, that you've maintained your innocence for so long that at this point it's impossible to come clean?
No. I have made mistakes in my life, and I regret those mistakes. But committing this case, these crimes against Kimberly Croft, is not one of them.
It goes without saying that everyone in this prison would rather be on the outside. But parole is not a right, it is a privilege that inmates earn by demonstrating good behavior. And Gary Reese had done just that. By all accounts, he was a model inmate. He earned not one, but 2 college diplomas. And he has positive psychological ratings.
Why shouldn't he be eligible for parole?
Because we aren't talking about just rape. We're talking about murder. When he left the apartment, he thought I was dead.
Coming up, the parole board meets. Will Gary Reese go free? When Justice Files continues. Kimberly Croft is a very determined woman. It's been more than 20 years since she was brutally raped by Gary Reese. And during those years, Kim has fought tenaciously to block Reese's parole 3 times. But as you'll see, at Reese's 4th parole hearing, the odds were against her. As the hearing begins, the anxiety in the room is evident.
The board has convened to consider the case of Gary Reese.
On one side sits Reese's family, praying for the release of their loved one. On the other sits his victim, raped when she was alone in her apartment and helpless. But today, she's enlisted the help of Captain Whalen and a top Cleveland prosecutor named Carmen Marino. After the board hears a favorable report on Reese from Reese's attorney,
it is time for parole.
Kim makes her statement.
The crimes Gary Reese committed were savage, vile, and reprehensible.
A majority of the board wants to set Reese free, but Kim tries to make them feel her pain.
There were 3 stab wounds in my left breast area, one of which punctured and collapsed my lung. There were a multitude of lacerations to my face and neck as well. After 8 reconstructive surgeries on my face and 4 on my chest, I am still left with visible scars.
Then the police captain and the prosecutor deliver their own 1-2 punch.
To my knowledge, sitting here today, Mr. Reese has never admitted to this crime. His defense was, got the wrong guy, wrong man, wasn't me. Baloney. We have the right man, and the right man is where he belongs.
When should he get out? I echo Captain Whalen. He should never get out.
Will it be enough to change the minds of the board members? After taking a recess to deliberate, they return with a stunning decision.
As you all know, he has served 20 years. To release Mr. Reese now would diminish the seriousness of his criminal conduct.
Reese will remain in prison and not be eligible for parole until the year 2005.
Oh God, somebody else isn't going to get hurt this year.
A clear victory for Kim and victims' rights, but a monumental defeat for Reese.
It's just another kick in the teeth. It doesn't end.
Kim hopes her crusade will influence other victims to fight back.
You owe it to yourself and your self-respect and your self-esteem to think of yourself as better than somebody's garbage.
But although Kim has won this battle to keep Reese behind bars, she knows that the war is far from over.
There is no end, because I have to live with this the rest of my life.
We've just examined the cases of several victims who fought back against their attackers and through whose courage and strength dangerous criminals were brought to justice. Let's turn now to the story of one woman who's been fighting back against a new brand of criminal: online sex predators. He may be able to cover his face, but this man can no longer hide his alleged obsession. Authorities say he was using the internet to prey on young girls, but it turns out his last target wasn't a child at all. It was this 45-year-old mom. Nancy Casey is on a mission to capture online predators. To do that, she poses as young girls. It all started last fall with an innocent trip to the web.
I typed in preteen looking for things for our 11-year-old daughter, and there's 10 in a row, and out of the 10, 7 or 8 were of child porn websites.
That led Nancy to join an observation group called Internet Watch. And then she went even further, spending up to 18 hours a day patrolling the web for pedophiles. She creates phony profiles of young girls, enters an online plug, and waits. It doesn't take long before her young characters are solicited by online predators.
When I get enough information on these guys, like name, age, area, I call the police in their areas and tell them who I am and who I work for, and that I think I found a suspect in their area.
With Nancy's help, at least 7 men have been put behind bars. Some would say Nancy is a hero, but she does have her critics, like Perry Aftab, the executive director of Cyber Angels, an online watchdog site with 4,000 volunteers worldwide. Cyber Angels also patrols the web, but it draws the line at masquerading as children. Perry says inexperienced civilians who go too far can cause more harm than good.
You might be in a room where there's an FBI agent who really is undercover trying to take that person down, and your profile may be more seductive than theirs. The last thing you want to do is get in the way of that investigation.
I work with the cops. I've been told by more than one, that without people like us, the citizens, the watchdogs who go in and try to clean up the net, their job is much harder.
And indeed, the problem may be enormous. 21 million kids in the United States are now using the internet, and an alarming 48% say they are sharing personal information with strangers on the web. Perry warns that even a little information can go a long way with prying predators.
If she gives out her first name, her age, and her state, and in a chat room, somebody says, "What sports do you play?" and she says, "Softball," and they say, "Oh, who's the toughest team on your circuit?" and she says, "Riverdale," you now know what circuit she's in. And if you say, "When do you play Riverdale?" and she says, "In 2 weeks," you know her school. And you know where she's going to be on the field that day. And if you say, "What position do you play?" and she says, "Second base," you found that kid.
And it's danger like that that keeps Nancy Casey going.
I love my job. I don't get paid. I have astronomical phone bills, but I love what I do because I know for every one that gets off the internet that lands in jail, it's more kids that are saved.
For many victims of violent crime, the prosecution of their attackers is an ordeal. They are forced to relive the most horrible moment of their life, and they are intensely scrutinized as they do so. But according to Professor Arthur Miller, the courage of these victims is invaluable to our society.
Not every victim fights back. Keep in mind that most people, if something terrible happens to them, think, "I want to get on with the rest of my life. I want to put this behind me," and that's very understandable. In many cases, indeed, it's the wisest course because participating in the prosecution of someone who attacks you requires a very high level of commitment. It is incredibly stressful. You are interviewed by countless people, police, prosecutors, defense attorneys, maybe even the media. And if the case goes to trial, you have to get on the witness stand and be cross-examined. That can be very tough. And then you have to wait for the verdict. It can be very agonizing. In a real sense, you're being doubly victimized, and you're extending the life of this horrendous event. A lot of people simply can't do it. But there's nothing more convincing to a jury than the testimony of a victim. To have a sympathetic and articulate victim is number one on any prosecutor's wish list. It enhances the likelihood of conviction tremendously. So think about the stories we've just seen. They're about people who fought back. These people represent the best of human nature. What these very special people did should serve as a warning to would-be criminals. In a perfect world, every victim would do this, and every criminal would be brought to justice.
I'm Don Daler. Thanks for being with us. Join us again as we look behind the headlines at crime, punishment, and the law on the next edition of Justice Files.